So there are some empty seats for those in the back. It kind of makes me nervous. You're standing out there where there's empty seats right here. Maybe if you could take a moment and sit down, you'll be able to enjoy this a little bit more. There's a couple right here. So, like Mark says, I think that artificial intelligence is the most powerful, potent force that we've unleashed. It's going to affect everything that I have been able to imagine, including the religious arena, which I will just touch on briefly tonight. But there's one thing that we know about artificial intelligence that lots that we don't know, and one of the things I'm very certain about is that compared to where we'll be in 30 years, there are today no experts in AI. All right, compared to where we'll be in 30 years, there are no experts in AI. We really even don't know what artificial intelligence is. So, as you embark and as you go forward, just keep that in mind, that people in this room are more likely to become the experts in AI than anybody living or working today. So it's just at the very, very beginning. And you shouldn't feel at all hesitant by the fact that maybe you don't understand things, maybe you don't know how things in AI work, and that's because nobody does. All right? And it's not just that this is a new technology that we don't know about, it's that fundamentally the way AI works is that even when it's working, we don't actually know how it works. Okay, so that's part of the challenge ahead of us, is that the way this stuff works is that it's like a mind that's not really accessible to us, so that even when it's working, we're not 100% sure we know how it's working. So as we move into understanding this, just keep that in mind, that you have as much chance of inventing the next thing in AI as anybody else, because there are no experts really today. I want to talk about a couple of things about AI. The main thing I want to talk about is give you a little bit sense of trying to understand it, what we do understand. And secondly, I want to put it into the context of the cosmos, of other things, to maybe help frame the questions that we want to ask. So it's very clear that this is the most fundamental thing that we've unleashed. And we're not going to answer that tonight about what it means or what it can do or how we should regulate it. In fact, I don't think we're going to answer it for the next 100 years, because this is going to be a 100-year project. And the questions that we are going to be asking are going to be re-asked again and again as the technology develops and as we develop our understanding of it. So this is an ongoing conversation. And part of what I want to do is to try to come up with better ways to ask questions, or maybe even better questions to ask. So I would consider tonight a success if people left with a better question than they came in with. Okay? So in terms of trying to put the context of artificial intelligence, which is what we're talking about, in the terms of the other technologies, I want to start with this one little, I guess I'd call it a metaphor or statement. And this is a fact that most of the things that we collectively humans invent every year, are invented simultaneously, meaning that there is more than one person who comes up with this idea, maybe even comes up with the ability to make it at the same time. It's very, very, very rare for any innovation or invention these days to occur alone, as solo. Almost always, things are being invented simultaneously, independently around the globe. And part of that is because any invention is not a single idea, it's a network of ideas that are related to each other. To make anything new today that's useful requires many different ideas working together in kind of like a network. And that generally what happens and what's needed for a new invention to occur is kind of the last little bit, where you take all the things and you take the one remaining idea and you put it together, and now you have something new. And that last step is kind of in the air. It's many people have it almost at the same time. And we have a patent office that kind of proves this, because there'll be multiple applications, all very, very close to each other, and the patent office is there to kind of sort them out and say, no, this person came first. And sometimes that first is a matter of days, weeks, even hours. And so the import of this is that the course of inventions are not really kind of dependent on hero inventors, these sort of strong, amazing people who have this idea and they're out ahead. It's much more of a cultural thing. It's much more of a long-term progression of ideas. And I would suggest even that a lot of these things could be thought of as inevitable, meaning that once you invent electric wires and switches and radio, you're going to invent the next thing, no matter what your political regime, no matter what the cultural context, there's going to be a sequence to things. And we know this in the past, when early prehistory inventions were on continents that were separated without communication, that the sequence of inventions were very, very similar anywhere on the globe, which suggests, in a certain sense, that the sequence of technologies follows more of a progression rather than kind of just a random sequence of ideas as remarkable people have them. No, it's much more culturally determined by what's come before. So I would say that in addition to this, technology also has a bias, meaning that it leans in certain directions. And that leaning is generated by the physical nature of technologies that we make real in the world. Physics, chemistry dictate what is possible. All right? So we're bound by the laws of physics and chemistry and what we come up with. And that basic, fundamental, universal constraints constrain where technology can go. So it can lean in certain directions. And part of what I see as my job when we talk about the future is to identify that leaning, that bias in certain directions. Let me give you one quick example, which is what I would say is when we make copies of things, the internet wants to copy things. There's a bias in electronic networks to make copies of things ubiquitous. In fact, when we send a message across the country, it's being copied all along the way. When you are operating on your laptop or your phone, things are being copied inside all the time. So there is a bias towards copying, indiscriminate, promiscuous copying, which makes it really difficult when you have an intellectual property legal regime that wants to protect copies, copy protection. We're going to keep out copies or prevent copies from being made. You can't really prevent copies from being made freely because it's the bias of the technology is to make lots and lots of copies. So the technology is biased in the direction of the free flow of copies. There are many other biases like that, and AI will also have biases in the general makeup, and those biases will fundamentally rest on the nature of the chemicals and the physics of the materials that we make the AIs from. So we want to identify what those inherent leanings and urges are. And so I use the term trying to identify where technology wants to go, all things being equal, what it wants. So that suggests to us, and what that gives us, those leanings, is a way to look for the long-term trends in technology, even knowing that the very, very specific things are inherently unpredictable. So there is a predictability in the long-term trends and an inherent stochastic chaos and unpredictability at the specifics. So, and that's true even in natural evolution. It's true even in biology. So we could say that given the kind of gravity that we have on this planet, that four-legged quadrupeds were inevitable. It's the most stable physical configuration for locomotion. But while quadrupeds, and even in the artificial world, were inevitable. The zebra, this particular species, was not. It was simply unpredictable. You can't predict the zebra, but you could predict quadrupeds. Okay, so we would say in a certain sense that once you have radio waves and electrical stuff, you're going to have telephones. And maybe even eventually iPhones, mobile phones. Those were inherently expected and predictable, but the iPhone was unpredictable. It was the specifics you could not predict. Another way of metaphor of thinking about this is that if you have a valley and you have raindrops falling down this valley into the center, and we could say the path of any individual drop as it came down the hill was inherently stochastically unpredictable, but that the direction was predictable. It was inevitable. It's down. So even though we don't know how it's going to go specifically individually, it's unpredictable, but we know that it's going to head down. And that's sort of what we're trying to do with technology. And so I would say, in a certain sense, it's like, maybe another example is water flowing down a riverbed. Where it goes down the river is unpredictable, but it's going to stay in the floodplain. So I would say, in a certain sense, that telephones were inevitable, the iPhone was not, and artificial intelligences are inevitable, but the particular character, the specific brands, what happens with them, the regulation, the policy, the politics, all those are things that we have a choice about, and they make a huge difference. We have a huge envelope of space in which to choose these things, and that policy is something we can choose. So the internet was inevitable, but not what kind of internet, whether it was transnational, open or closed, owned by a commercial entity or nationalized. Those were all choices that we had, even though the internet itself as an entity was something that was inevitable. And so again, AI is in the same kind of boat where it's coming. We don't have a choice about that. But we do have a tremendous amount of choice in developing the character, the policies, the nature of it, who owns it, how it's run, how it's deployed, all these other things which make a huge difference to us. So, what is AI? Well, here's what it is not. It is not intelligence or IQ, which is a single dimension, sort of like loudness, where you start small and get bigger and bigger and bigger. All right, so that's the common idea is, well, the mouse has a little bit of intelligence, the monkey has more. There's the village idiot, there's us, there's the genius, there's AI. That's completely wrong. That's just not how it works. It's multidimensional. There's multiple dimensions to AI. Our own intelligences, to our intelligences, natural intelligences, our own minds, right now, the minds that you are using at least a dozen different cognition types, different nodes, and there's probably even more that we haven't identified yet. And these different types, they vary tremendously from person to person for different tasks. And you might think of them as sort of like a little kind of a symphony, a street where we have different instruments in a symphony, and each instrument is playing different notes. And so in humans, we have this mix, this complex, this suite of different types of cognition. And animals also have different kinds of cognition. We know dolphins, whales, dogs, and then grasshoppers or mice. And so they probably have a more simplified version, and they may have, but they may share some types of modes of thinking with us, and in some cases, their particular use of that one kind of cognition may even exceed us. And so the ground squirrel has an amazing long-term memory, and it can actually remember the location of specific acorns that it buries in the thousands over decades, something that we can't do. So it sort of exceeds us in certain dimensions. And when we go to make machines, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to engineer them to exceed us in certain of those dimensions because that's going to be useful to us. So we're going to make a calculator that exceeds us in this ability to do arithmetic. All right? So that's the only thing it can do. So it's really good at doing arithmetic, and it's horrible in terms of making a translation or navigating. But what we're going to do is make kind of an endless number of different kinds of minds, different kinds of thinking, and some of them will exceed us in certain of those dimensions. But here's the thing that's really amazing is that you've heard of the many things that AI has done, from the AlphaGo, which beat the best Go player, to the self-driving car examples. But what we don't appreciate is that to date, all the examples that we have of this emerging AI are basically synthesizing only one of those types of cognition, and that's perception. So what these machines have been able to do, these neural nets, is that they have been able to, they're pattern recognizers. They're able to recognize patterns, and that's the only thing that they've been able to do. And so with this, so there's a couple of things. It's good news, bad news. The good news is the amazing amount of work that we can do just with just one type of cognition. The bad news is that we have no idea how to synthesize any of the other types. That's your job. Okay? And so, so we have really far to go, even though we've gone pretty far with just synthesizing one type of cognition. What we are in the process of doing is filling up a zoo of possible types of minds, of like thinking, well, not only can we take how many different ways could we combine what we know the mind is doing, but there are probably completely artificial types of cognition that our minds can't do that we'll also invent and add and mix into these new AIs that we're going to make. The important thing is that in all cases, we're not trying to replicate human-like thinking. The power of these minds is that they do not think like humans. That gives us the ability to solve problems that we can't solve. Okay? So in the long-term thing, there may be problems like gravity waves or dark energy or something where maybe our minds simply alone can't solve it, so we need a two-step solution. And the first step is to make up some AIs that can think a little differently than us, that we can work together to solve that problem. So I like to think of this as filling in the space of possible minds, of all the different ways that you can make up a mind that could think. And again, some of these types of minds will be very small. They'll be very primitive. They'll have just a few nodes. They may be only as smart as a squirrel, but maybe they're a squirrel that can do something that we want done. Okay? They don't have to be full-fledged, we're going to talk to them. They are just going to be engineered to do many things, including things that we didn't know we even wanted done. Or they may do things that we now do on a repetitious basis, and we're going to figure out what that is, and we're going to engineer them to do that. But we're going to fill out that space of all the different ways that you could do any kind of thinking. And it's a very big space. I mean, we don't even know how big. And one of the advantages, one of the byproducts of AI is there's actually a telescope into our own minds. We can't really ethically experiment on our own brains very much. And one of the chief ways we're going to find out about our own minds is by trying to replicate them and trying to make and fail in making them artificially. And as we do, that will be the telescope that we're going to use, or the microscope that we're going to use to figure out how our own minds work. And as we do that, we'll discover that our own minds are actually that little red dot way on the edge. Okay? What we're going to also discover is this idea of the superintelligence. The idea that there is somewhere, some dot on that space that is this godlike superintelligence is a complete myth. All right, there's no place here that's superior to anything else. Where do you place that superintelligence? And this is kind of a 3 dimensions, but in reality it'll be 10 dimensions, 11 dimensions. So there's a trade-off. There's always a trade-off. For you can't optimize every single dimension at the same time. It's just impossible. And so there is no such thing as this super intelligence, this singularity of the intelligence explosion. The idea is that you make an AI that's smarter than a human, and it makes something that's smarter than itself, and then it makes something that's smarter than itself. The AI is inventing itself smarter and smarter, and suddenly it goes faster and faster, and boom, you have God. That's the singularity theory, is that it happens very fast, and then suddenly everything is different. We can't imagine what happens after that. I think that's itself a religious belief. It's a myth, because you can't optimize everything in that direction. There's always engineering trade-offs. You can't have a machine that's faster, smaller, lighter, stronger, jumps higher, crawls faster, cheaper, more powerful, all at the same time. There's always trade-offs. And so the idea of the super intelligence is a myth, because in reality, we always have to trade off in anything that we make. And so we can make something that's better than us in certain dimensions, but not all the dimensions. For a long time, the conception of where we were in the world was that we were at the center and the planets revolved around us. That was proven to be wrong. We also believed before Darwin that we were sort of at the center of the made animal world and everything revolved around us. And now we kind of believe that the human mind is at the center, that there's a universal intelligence and we have it. And that any other intelligence would be like us, but maybe faster. But that's also wrong, because I think just as we believe that we're at the center, we're actually way out. Our Earth is way out on the edge of the galaxy, not at the center of anything. I think our type of mind is also going to be way on the edge of all possible minds. We're just a very, very specific kind of intelligence, this combination that will be very, very specific and not at the center of anything. So the thing about these is that the best way to think about artificial intelligences is to consider them alien intelligences. All right? They're like, if we met someone on another planet, they're smart, they're conscious, maybe, and they're thinking, but they're not thinking like us. And again, that's the value of them, is they don't think like us. They think differently, because in an economy that we're in, the wealth goes to thinking differently. That's the Apple ad, right? You have to think different. It's like, how do you think differently when you're connected to all the people of the world 24 hours a day? It's very hard to think differently when you're connected to everybody else all the time. Having this thing that helps us, that thinks differently itself, is going to be an aid to us thinking differently while we're connected. Okay? And so this idea of these being alien intelligences, maybe what we should be calling them is artificial aliens. Okay? Artificial aliens. And so, you have like Spock on Star Trek or Data. They are thinking, they're creative, but they make jokes, but their jokes don't work on us. They work on other Vulcans. They're a little different. And I think that's the picture we want to have. You want to have this kind of, this idea that there's a million other, billion, zillion other galaxies, and there are maybe civilizations on them, and who knows if we'll ever contact these other aliens. But if we did, it would be a huge disruption in our lives, right? If we had absolute straight contact with another ET from another world, that would really revolutionize our world. Well, we don't know whether that will happen, but we're certain that we're going to make an artificial alien with AI. And I think that the consequence of doing that will be very, very similar to meeting an alien intelligence. We're going to make an alien intelligence on this planet, and I think some of the effects are going to be very similar to like First Contact. And if you remember in that movie, the hero was a theologian, right? Because there was a huge effect of having contact with another intelligence or consciousness from another planet. So I think, theologically, identity, psychological, a lot of these things are going to be disrupted. Besides the technological aspect, all these other things are going to be disrupted in the same way that they would if we met alien beings and they were sitting in the classroom with us. We would have to maybe rethink our role, who we were, why we were here, what's unique about us, what do we want to be. So right now today, as I said, we have an AIs that can do one thing, which is perception. And one of the things that these AIs can do, for instance, is they can generate these faces. So not a single one of these, and there's thousands and 10,000s of them, are real people. They're not just people that have been modified. These are people that basically this AI has painted. It's painted this photograph. It's imagined the people, the background, the setting, the whole thing. It's just made up. So these are just imaginary people that the AI has invented and made into a photograph. And you've heard about AlphaGo, which is one of the AIs, Google's AIs. And this one, which was important about this one, is that it learned how to learn. Okay, so that it was playing this video game, but it wasn't taught the rules of the game. It was just given the game to play, and it got points for winning, and the more points it got, the more it played. So it was learning how to learn. So that was a huge step in an AI that was learning how to learn. And again, these don't play like humans. They're alien. They're creative and they're smart, but in a different way that no human would be like, and that is their advantage. Another thing we actually have today is this universal Babelfish of human real-time translation, where you can put something in your ear, and I'm speaking English, you're speaking Chinese to me, I hear English, I speak back, you hear Chinese. If this became cheap and ubiquitous, which I think it will within 7 to 10 years, this will be a huge transformation of the world, because it would mean there are all these people around the world who are very, very talented, who have great talent, except for the talent of speaking English, and now they could participate in a global economy from wherever they are. All right, so imagine all the people this would unleash, whose talents would be unleashed because they could now apply somewhere where they would need English, and they don't have that skill, they have all the other skills. And so that's a way, again, this is running on perception. This is just language perception. It's a very simple, single kind of cognition that we've learned to synthesize. Another thing we're doing with AI right now is this LetterSpot, and this is called precision agriculture, and the way it works is that this thing is going down the rows, and it's inspecting each individual plant. And it remembers where that plant is because it has GPS, and it says, I know you. And it's looking, and you need a little bit of fertilizer, or you don't need much water. And it's giving the exact amount of water and nutrients to that particular plant, and it goes on to the next plant, all the way down. And it's doing something that a human farmer would love to be able to do, but can't. It's giving individual attention to each plant on this huge field. And that it's reducing the amount of fertilizer, water necessary, and increasing the overall health of all the plants in a way that no human could do. That's what an AI can do. And it can even do things like the solar-powered weeder, which is just weeding individual plants. It's just solar power. You put it out in the field and it goes by itself forever, just weeding. Actually, it's not picking them up, it's spraying, doing a little spray of pesticide in a very controlled way. And so even agriculture, farming, will be affected by AI. So they're doing kind of jobs that either we don't want to do or we don't do well to begin with. But what that means is they're making new jobs for us to do. Right? So this idea that they're taking away their jobs, yeah, they're taking away jobs that nobody wants to do. All right? That's the first step. And unleashing us to do new jobs that we would like to do. What robots are really good for is any task that requires productivity or efficiency. Right? Robots are good for efficiency. Humans are terrible with efficiency. We're the most inefficient beings around. All right? And the things that are most valuable in our society today are all inefficient. Science, inherently inefficient. Right? If you're a scientist and say, oh, I'm 100% efficient, every experiment I do works, you're learning nothing. Okay? Art is inherently inefficient. I mean, Picasso wasn't being paid by how many paintings per hour he was making. All right? Discovery. All these things are inherently inefficient. Art, small talk, human experiences are all inefficient. So the things that we most want to do, the things that are most valuable in our society are inefficient, which means it's great for us because we are masters of inefficiency. Efficiency is for robots, okay? Okay, and so where we're going to sell are places where inefficiency or efficiency does not really matter very much. Where the new is, where there's human experience, where there's invention and discovery to be made. Okay? When this is a picture of Garry Kasparov, the world's chess champion about 2 decades ago, losing to Deep Blue. At the moment he lost to the supercomputer from IBM. It was like considered like the end of humanity and the end of chess. Well, it was wrong in many cases because chess actually got better. And as humans learned to play against computerized chess, they actually became better players. But more importantly, Kasparov said that wasn't really fair playing against a computer because that computer had access to a database of every single chess game that has ever been played. He said, if I was sitting there and if I, the human player, had access to that same database, I would have won. And most people believe that he would have won. So Kasparov decided to make a new league, a new chess league, where you could play as an AI, you could play as a human, or you could play as a team of AI plus human, as Kasparov was suggesting. And in the last 4 years, the best chess player on this planet is not an AI. It's not a human, it's a team of AIs plus humans. And Kasparov called that a centaur. He called that team a centaur, half and half. And so the best chess players are centaurs. The best medical dietitians are not an AI. It's not a human doctor. It's an AI plus humans. In the military, they use centaurs. For the robo-soldiers, the best robo-soldier is not a robot and it's not a human. It's the team of AI plus humans because they're complementary. They're both doing things a little differently. And I think in the long term, we're going to be paid by how well we work with these AIs. We're not working against them, we're working with them, ideally. Okay? And again, it's not that they're doing rote work. They're doing work that might be repetitive, but that doesn't mean they can also be creative. This is a painting by an AI. It's not very good, but it's creative. AIs can be creative. You can program creativity. Creativity is a mechanical process that can be programmed in to an algorithm. So you can make creativity, but it's not like a human creativity. It's kind of weirdly different. Okay? And you can track emotions. AIs can discern all the emotional states that humans have, and we can actually put emotions into AIs. And we do that because when we work with things, we like to have an emotional dimension. So we're going to put emotions into AIs because we find that we work better with that. All right? And they're useful. And primitive emotions are actually useful to the AIs themselves. Things like pain. We've already started to put pain into robots because it's useful. It keeps them from operating on something that's broken, making it worse. That's why we have pain. It's not to make them suffer. It's not out of any sense of sadomasochism. It's it's a very useful thing to put into an organism to prevent it from damaging itself. And so this idea of kind of artificial emotions is an entire field right now of putting in the emotional component into AIs. And again, it's because these are mechanical processes. And we're discovering again and again that a lot of biological things in nature are actually processes that can be imported into mechanical systems. There isn't anything kind of supernatural about processes like emotion or creativity or even life or intelligence. They're not supernatural powers. They are mechanical processes that can be taken out and moved into a mechanical system. Mind, consciousness, souls, we kind of tend to use these interchangeably, but what we're going to discover that each of these is probably very different, and it's probably none of these are singular. They're probably made up of many different varieties, and there's probably a continuum. So they're not binary. It's not like you're conscious or you're not, or you're living or you're not. There are gradations. There are levels. There are types. There are diversities. There's probably 100 different things in these 4 words that we don't even have the vocabulary to untangle yet, but we will. Okay? So it's not a binary thing. There is just this long, expanding universe of different types. We can imagine that there could be a mind that doesn't have consciousness, or maybe there's consciousness with no soul, maybe there's a soul but no mind, there's a spirit but no consciousness. Right now, that doesn't mean much to us because these words are kind of vague and not very specific, but one of the things we're going to be discovering is kind of figuring out what we mean by consciousness. Where does it exist? How do we detect it? Can we put it into other things? And to what degree? So all these things kind of confront us when we try to work with the ethics of AI, which is the famous Charlie problem of, how do we decide and how do we teach these AIs to make decisions, particularly when they involve us? And the short answer is that it's actually pretty easy to teach ethics to an AI because it's just code. It's like law is kind of like a code. You just put it in. That's not the difficult part. The difficult part is that our own morality and ethics are very shallow, very inconsistent, and mostly unaware. So in other words, we don't have very good ethics ourselves. We're not even aware of them. We don't even know how they work. So therefore, we find it very difficult to teach the AIs this. All right. So if we can come up and figure out and make a consistent ethics, it's actually not that difficult to pass them on. The problem is that we're in the process of trying to figure out what our response is. How do we decide? Because in the past, we've never forced ourselves to make that. We're driving down this road and we have to swerve to the pedestrian or keep the passenger safe. And when we decide, we don't judge ourselves for that. We're not saying, well, you shouldn't have done that. We're saying, I happened too fast, I couldn't decide. Well, we don't give that pass to the AIs. We say, we have to decide beforehand. So now we're being forced to improve our own ethics. We're being forced to improve our own morality, like being a parent, being challenged by teaching their kids, and we realize, oh my gosh, I wasn't very good. I have to get better. So one of the things that this is doing is that it's kind of like applied philosophy for the first time. All these car companies have been hiring philosophers to help them. What philosophers do is they talk about these things in a rigorous way. So they're saying, okay, let's do it in a methodical way rather than just sort of what we think. And that kind of effort to employ people to actually make decisions beforehand so we can then teach the AIs what to do is improving us collectively as a species because it's forcing us to be better humans than we used to be. Right? We're better than we used to be. Do we protect the passenger first or not? we have to decide that. We have to think through that. What are all the cases? And then we can tell the AIs what to do. Asimov was famous for his 3 laws of robotics, difference between right and wrong. That's just kind of a start. That's the easy first beginning. Here are some rules. And we will probably develop more rules like that we can then pass on into the machines that we make. So it's not difficult to program them into robots. It's very difficult to figure out what it is that we want to convey. We have, in that world, we have cyber war right now. And the problem with cyber war is that we collectively haven't decided what's acceptable. We don't have the consensus on what a country is allowed to do to another country in terms of cyber. Is it okay to take out the banking system? Is it okay to target a factory that makes food? We don't have the consensus because we as humans, as Americans, as Chinese, haven't yet agreed on what is permitted. So that's why cyber war is such a challenge, is because we don't have a consensus. And then we have things like the kill decision about whether we should let the drones have autonomous decision about killing an enemy combatant. And there are several arguments about. One is that it's a complete cop-out to let a machine decide what humans should decide, and that if we do that, then it becomes too easy for the humans to let the drone kill. On the other side, it turns out that the drones and algorithms will never be accused of a war crime because they've been programmed to be absolutely faithful, and so they are less emotional, less likely to jump the gun or be incorrect in their assessment. And so it's kind of a weird argument about whether that we should only let humans kill the humans, we shouldn't let machines kill it. We have that argument already with cars. So every year, last year, 1 million people died in car accidents, 1 million people. And they were all killed by human error. So it's that we find that's okay. We accept that price for the technology, 1 million people dead, as long as humans kill them. But if AIs kill them, we're outraged. We're outraged by that. And so there's an asymmetry. There's something amiss there where we allow humans to do killing, but not machines, when in fact we should just prevent humans from killing entirely. So that's what we have to wrestle with in the ethics of these. I like to show this picture of people testing the Boston Dynamics because it looks like they're being tortured. They're actually just trying to test them, but it does seem like they are tripping them, and so this brings up something that we will have to deal with, which is if we have all these, if we have basically machines and robots that are doing our bidding like slaves, even if they aren't slaves, if we treat them like slaves, that's a very corrosive relationship to be in, right? Slavery is corrosive, not just that it's bad for the slave, but it's bad for those who are the overseers. And so if we treat these as slaves, that's corrosive on us. Okay, so that's, again, another dimension that we have to kind of figure out. What do we want our relationship to be to things that are just doing whatever we tell them to do? Is there a ritual for turning them off? Okay, and so part of it will be, well, what's the character, what's the domain, how is this politically, who owns them? All these other issues of regulation. So the AIs are inevitable, but the system and the character we make makes a difference to us. I like to think of these as mind children, as in the way that they are the children that birthed out of our minds, and we're going to treat them like children to some extent, looking for good jobs for them, trying to give values to them so they can pass on those values. And eventually we will create free will beings they'll make some decisions. We're going to give them more ability decisions. And there may be a moment where one of them says, oh, I have a soul. What should I do? And then we need to have a response to them. What are we going to tell them? I've been proposing for a number of years that I'm actually working on. It's called a catechism for robots. Here's something. Here's where you came from. Here's why you're here. Here is what your purpose is. So I think, again, this is the framework of having them help us become better. I think there's kind of 4 general ways we can go with humanity. We can have many species, one mind, many minds, one species. I think we're going to keep changing ourselves over time. But I think all these technologies produce this ongoing identity crisis. Who are we as humans? We have all these beings we can make. We can genetically modify ourselves. Who do we want humans to be? What should we be? What can we be? What ought we be? It's a very, very difficult thing. Right now, we have all these other issues about what does it mean to be male or female? What does it mean to be American or Chinese? What does it mean to be here? Now we have to add another one. What does it mean to be human? What should we be as a human? And so I think my takeaway is that the purpose of these AI and robots, the reason why we're going to make more of them, is that they're going to help us to become better humans. That's what it is. This, in general, are devices that are going to make us better humans. So I wanted to end with just 4 or 5 little things about where things are going on today if you wanted to be involved in continuing this conversation. The term that's being used in industry is AI safety. That's the larger term. There's whole conferences on that where people in the industry itself who are making AIs are having these conversations about how do we control it, what do we do, what's permitted, how do we best transmit these values. There's another group of people called Responsible Robotics, and they are immersed in the whole issue about whether robots should be weaponized, whether AI should be weaponized. It's a group that you don't have to be an expert in. They accept all kinds of people who are having this larger conversation about how to make robotics responsible. There's the Ethics and Governance of AI, which is a whole program at Stanford where that's the entire focus, is how do we govern these things that seem at first to be very hard to govern. And then there's the Human-Centered AI and AI Now, which are two institutes that are, again, trying to tackle this larger question. So in a minute I want to end, but I just want to end with the story about where this fits into technology in the cosmos. And I think of these technologies as ideas that we make real. So technologies are just conceptual things that we make physically real somehow or other. Okay? And if I was to stand up here and tell you a bad idea, or a stupid idea, you would say, that's a stupid idea. Your counsel to me would not be to think less. You would say, hey, Kevin, that's a terrible idea. You need to think less. Have less thoughts. Stop thinking. But in fact, what you would suggest is that you need a better idea. So if we have a technology that turns out to be harmful or not ideal, we say that's a bad or stupid technology. The response is not less technology. It's not to go backwards. It's not to say no technology. It's to say better technology. Just like if I have a bad or stupid idea, it's not to think less, have less thoughts. It's to have better ideas. Okay? So we want to come up with better ideas because that's what technology is. It's not that there's bad ones, that the solution is less of them. So we want to increase technology all the time. better and better ideas. And DDT, the insecticide sprayed on plantations of cotton as a pesticide, was a terrible idea. It just was bad for environment. It was very, very, very disruptive. But it wasn't DDT's problem. It was just a bad job. So the idea was to have a better idea with DDT, which was to use it around households to eliminate malaria, where it's incredibly effective and saved tens, if not hundreds of millions of lives a year, and does not affect the environment. So that's a better idea, same technology, finding a better job for it. Nuclear weapons, bad idea. Nuclear power, good idea, okay? So I think what we get out of this is that there's, every new technology creates almost as many new problems as it solves. But those new problems are new choices, new possibilities. And those new possibilities themselves are better because we have more choices. So that's a tiny bit improvement. So next year we'll have a few % more choices than we had last year. Even though some of those things that we made have bad consequences, we have more choices. That tiny bit of improvement of a 1% or something is progress. So if we are able to create even 1% more than we destroy every year, that 1% compounded year by year is civilization. So the world doesn't have to be that much better each year to actually have progress. Okay, so 1%, if we can create 1% more than we destroy, even though we're destroying 49%, if we have a 51% that we create, it looks like terrible. 49% crap, 49% harm, 49% harmful, 51% good. That small delta is all we need to have civilization. Okay, so there is going to be a huge amount of harm caused by AI, for sure. There's lots of bad things that's going to happen because of AI. But if we can create a few % more than we use to destroy every year, we have progress. Okay, and our job as humans is to kind of find the right things for these, right jobs for these technologies. You know, whether it's DDT or nuclear power or AI. It's like we're trying to find the right thing for this inevitable technology to do. And here's my closing request, is that the only way that we get to steer technology is by using it. Okay, we can't steer it if we don't use it. If we prohibit it, turn it off, turn it down, turn it away, we don't get to steer. It's going to come anyway, but we're not steering. So we want to embrace these new things in order to steer them. So if you want to influence the future of AI, you have to start embracing it, using it. Doesn't mean that you have to use it all or everything. It doesn't mean you have to accept it. It just means you have to be engaged with it. You can't steer it unless we're engaged with it. So engage AI in order to steer it. So what we get out of all these things is that we get increase in differences, choices, options, opportunities. We keep making new choices. AI gives us new choices that we never had before. And I want to end with this one metaphor, which is, imagine Mozart being born before anybody who invented the symphony or the harpsichord or the piano. Maybe he was born 1,000 years before. And his genius would have been lost to the world and to himself as well. So he was depending on someone coming up inventing this technology that he could show his genius. And then we could have Van Gogh. Imagine if he was being born 1,000 years before anyone invented oil paints and canvas. What a loss to the world and to him. Or, you know, anybody else. Hitchcock, Lucas, before he invented cinema. What a loss without that technology having been invented. That means that somewhere today, there's a young kid, a young girl, a young boy who's waiting for us to invent their technology so that your genius can be shared into the world. So we have a moral obligation to keep inventing new technologies new choices, new options, including AI and the many varieties of that, in order to keep expanding the possibilities for the people born today and yet unborn. That's what we get with technology, right? So we have an obligation to keep it, expanding it. Possible things, possible beings, possible experiences. So even though people who work in technology, maybe they're making something that seems like, oh, it's just a consumer item, it's just being thrown away, maybe it doesn't last very much, they're still expanding the space of the possible. They're still trying to make something new so that the geniuses in the future can share their talents with us. So that is the long arc through history that we're partaking of when we make things, when we invent new things. Even though they have a cost, even though they're going to create new problems, we are expanding that realm of possible. And that is the long story that we partake in when we make new things. So thank you for your attention.